Official way to start. All right, welcome to the discussion session for Tuesday, March 14th. We'll start with review of tonight's meeting agenda. Manager McGill, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Tonight's agenda, we have a public hearing for the resolution for the transfer of a liquor license to Arthur's Corner Pub. That's 4 Bower Hill Road. We have the consideration of approval for a line of credit of $100,000 with West Banco Bank for some additional purchasing cards. We have consideration for the development of financial security adjustment for financial security posted for Cedar Place Land Development, 62 Cedar Boulevard. We also have the consideration for the release of financial security posted for grading and stormwater at 291 Magnolia Place. We have the consideration of the award of the 2023 root damage sidewalk maintenance contract. And then finally, the consideration of bids for our annual street sweeping program.
Great, thank you. Now we have a Mike Haberman double feature.
And I was just gonna say, welcome, Mike, again. I feel like
Thanks.
you're our featured guest every. Thank you for spending so much of your time with us.
Only going to become more so.
You gotta move in.
Well, the first item is the Cedar Salem Holy Crest intersection improvements. So Mike, take a look.
Share my screen for the folks who are at home. That's pop up too, right? Continue to share. All right, just give me 1 second.
You're on the screen.
I know, but it's sharing not the one that I don't want to share. Yeah. Try that. Oh, he's.
I'm like fighting him for control. Like,
It's moving. We're gonna try this.
stop.
All right, let's start with that one. So just as a brief background, for those of you who maybe weren't aware of where this came from, and then what I outlined in my memo, which I updated last week. This came to the traffic board last fall. A resident came whose son was hit as a pedestrian at this intersection. In addition, some other residents came and expressed some of their concerns with safety at this intersection and crossings. Go ahead.
Can you hear him okay? Does he need to speak a little louder? All right, okay, sorry.
So that's where it initially came to the traffic board. So the traffic board asked that we take an overall look at this intersection. And we wanted to look at it not just quantitatively, but qualitatively. So the first thing that we did was we collected data here during several hours in the morning and in the late afternoon when school was getting out, as well as the evening rush hour. We did an evaluation of the intersection from a straight numbers and capacity analysis standpoint. We also ran some warrant analyses to see if, you know, are stop signs warranted on Cedar? Is a traffic signal warranted? Are there any deficiencies as far as operational capacity? Are the volumes so high here that delays are excessive? Those are the kinds of things that we wanted to look at. We also got 11 years worth of crash data from the police department. So that's the quantitative analysis that we performed. And essentially what the analysis showed is that from a pure traffic volume standpoint, the intersection operates I don't want to say efficiently, but acceptable. It doesn't fail. The delays aren't excessive. Stop signs aren't warranted on
Vehicle
Cedar.
traffic. You're talking about vehicle
It's all traffic.
Okay, all traffic.
All volumes are inputted in the analysis. So no signals warranted. The delays are not excessive. The levels of service are acceptable. We also looked at the crash data for the past 11 years. Over the past 11 years, there were 13 total crashes. 9 were reportable. 4 were non-reportable. Just a refresher, reportable is an injury or a tow is required, and non-reportable is, you know, you can drive your vehicle away and nobody's injured, but maybe there's a report taken that we get, police can get to us, that's a non-reportable. So 13 total crashes over an 11-year period. That did encompass the pedestrian who was hit. Those 13 that was in there in the data that we looked at. Just for comparison, industry standard, PennDOT standard, MUTCD standard essentially says that a crash pattern exists at an intersection where you would have 5 or more reportable crashes over a 12-month period of the same type and causation.
That's PennDOT standard.
And MUTCD, that's right out of federal standard. So that when we say we're gonna do a crash data analysis, those are the kinds of things we're looking for. Are there, if you had a 10 angle crashes here of somebody pulling out of Hollycrest and getting, into an angle crash. You had 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of those over a 12-month period, that raises a flag that maybe there's something else wrong there. Maybe it's overcapacity, maybe there's some other deficiency. So that's again, quantitatively, the numbers didn't reach that threshold to say, hey, there's a significant problem here.
Or PennDOT or MUTCD.
Correct.
We in Mount Lebanon could make our own rules on that if we wanted to legally.
No, I don't think we can, I don't believe that Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't believe we can put in signals or stop signs unless they meet warrants.
Correct.
And that would be part of meeting a warrant was the crash thing.
In fact, that crash data in and of itself is a warrant for stop signs and is a warrant potentially depending on the severity and the number of for a signal.
So do you guys hear that, residents? We need more crashes. Get on. Just kidding.
So that's the qualitative analysis. And then another thing that we typically do that the traffic board asks us to do, is kind of do, we'll call it a roadway safety audit, or just to evaluate signage, geometry, just the general expectations of a public roadway for the motoring public and for pedestrians. So that's essentially what we discussed and pointed out at the traffic board meeting. We ran through some options here based on information we got from residents as far as their discomfort and concerns with crossing Cedar Boulevard at that intersection, the size of the intersection, the length of the crossing, the geometry of the road. So we wanted to take a little closer look at the physical geometry of the intersection and we pointed out a couple of things. So I'm gonna just kind of switch over to, which means I have to stop sharing first. I'm gonna switch over to the aerial. Give that a second to load up. So just a couple of things that we pointed out that are a little bit, I'll call it unorthodox with this intersection. So one was Hollycrest is obviously a one-way. I'm going to call this westbound so we can call Cedar Boulevard northbound, southbound. It's a one-way westbound. Historically, I don't know when it became a one-way, but geometrically, if you look at the roadway and the width of it from curb to curb, it's it's as wide as any other road in the municipality that would have been two-way. So presumably at some point in time, that was a two-way roadway, probably made a one-way as a result of school traffic and cut-throughs and things like that. So when it was converted to a one-way, you put in, essentially took that lane or that roadway width and put in and made it 2 lanes. Now, it's not permitted to have 2 lanes on a stop sign approach. If this were a state road and we were starting today and you had a one-way road coming out at a stop sign into a state road that's doesn't have stop signs, you don't put 2 lanes. The reason you don't put 2 lanes is because if you don't need it from a capacity standpoint, it's just creating a situation where someone that's going to go straight or turn right, someone's going to turn left, it's next to each other, then they fight each other to be able to see, and they end up out in the middle of the intersection. So if you don't need it for capacity, we typically don't put it in. So that was just one thing, and I'm not saying that that's causing major problems, but it's something that's creating conflict points between vehicles and pedestrians. The second thing we pointed out, obviously, Salem is a boulevard style type of a roadway, meaning you have this big landscape island down the middle of it. Each side of Salem is 22 to 24 feet wide. So again, as wide as a normal 2-way roadway that you would see anywhere else in the municipality. Doesn't have a whole lot of signing or anything like that. So if you weren't familiar with it, again, most people who are coming through this corridor are familiar with it. And if you're going on to Salem, you're either living in that neighborhood or you're familiar with the corridor. But if you weren't familiar with it, it's not real obvious, this is the road you turn into, or this is the road you turn into, or where you would come out. So it also creates a very wide, call it an approach, but it's really two approaches separated by an island. That to me is kind of what resulted in what you're seeing here with this hashed out yellow area. Because everywhere else on Cedar Boulevard, as you go to the south, is wide enough for 3 lanes. So as you go down, you'll see each intersection you get to, there's turn lanes, a little left turn lane, and then your through lanes are along the curbs. But for whatever reason, when you get to here, you go, well, why is this striped out yellow, striped out area in here? To me, it wants to be a left turn lane, but because the left turns onto Salem happen up here, if you stripe in the left turn lane here, it almost invites you to turn into here. So it geometrically just didn't make sense. So instead of striping a turn lane in, that middle area was hashed out and the through traffic was pushed over against the curb. So that if you are turning left onto Salem, you kind of come into the middle of the intersection and around that island. Again, just a little unorthodox, not something that if we had a blank canvas here, that's not how we would design it, if that makes sense. So these were things we pointed out. In that data, when we take a little deeper dive into that data, this crossing, we collected 6 hours worth of data. In that 6 hours, cumulatively, 110 pedestrians crossed Cedar Boulevard here. So that was by far the majority of the crossings were happening here. And then whether they continue straight up Salem, for the most part, that's what they did, or they came down Salem, crossed this way, and then continued either up Holly Crest or down towards the school and towards the recreation center. The second highest would have been this crossing on Holly Crest, which isn't marked. We've talked about marked and unmarked crosswalks in the past, but that carried 53 during that 6 hour period. So about half as many as this carried. Good thing is that nobody crossed here during that 6 hour period. So people were crossing in the marked crosswalk on this northbound approach, and then they were also crossing Holly Crest. And then to a smaller degree, 19 had crossed Salem, through the island and over this way. So 19, 53, and about 110. So
Remember what the hours were that 6 hours?
6 to 9 a.m. and 3 to 6 p.m.
Okay, so you broke it off
Yeah.
intentionally to try to.
We wanted to capture school and commuting.
Yeah.
Well, that's morning rush, that's during the time frame where we actually have a guard stationed there, correct?
There is a chunk of that time.
Right.
Correct. Yep. So from that, I'm gonna stop sharing again. And switch to the other one.
You mentioned how many reported accidents there?
There were 9 reportable over an
And-
11-year period.
We're 11 years, yeah.
Were those accidents that there were actually police reports for? Like, can we pull them and look at them
Oh,
and
yeah.
say, these are the reasons why the accident
Yes,
did occur?
I did.
Okay, great.
I reviewed every report.
And was it random or were they?
There was the highest number, and it's in my traffic board report, which I want to say the highest number was this one. Here it is, here's crashed, I'm sorry. So there were 9, and then other reportable crashes, 2 involved collisions with pedestrians. Again, one was the one, and then there was another one, I believe, might even been the crossing guard that was. And then seven of those 9 were angle crashes involving a motorist who was going straight across Cedar Boulevard from Holly Crest. So that may have been a function of that. If you're in the right lane, is the right lane the one that goes straight? Where, either cars that were parked along Cedar or someone's next to them trying to turn left and then they tried to go straight across the Salem. So 7 of those 9 were that movement. One was a rear end, which was, if I remember correctly, if you read the report, somebody stopped in the southbound direction to let a pedestrian cross, and the person behind them was looking at their phone and rear-ended the person who stopped.
Necessarily a geographic problem.
Correct.
Right, yeah.
Correct.
And reportable crash is a bit of a misnomer because they're all reported. But it's if a car is damaged, has to be towed, that it's qualified as reportable. So it's like, there's the reportable, and then there's the non-reportable.
Right.
Terminology could be
The
better.
reportables have to be reported to the state.
I was just curious, from the police report standpoint, that way we get the actual excuse if there was one. Or actual factual.
Take witness
data.
statements is under
Right, yeah.
that.
So from all of that, essentially what we said to the traffic board was, you know, qualitatively, there are some things out here, geometrically, there are some things out here that are unorthodox. And some consideration would be given to, I'll call them improvements or modifications to the intersection to enhance that pedestrian experience and pedestrian safety and enhance awareness of motorists who are traveling through the intersection. So I'll just step through kind of each one. This first exhibit here just is showing what we've already looked at on the aerial, just also some of the signs that are out there that are existing that we're showing on that plan. And then the first thing that we talked about, in fact, let me go back to this one real quick. So it's already posted and there's already in the ordinance, no parking from where my hand is up to the intersection. And then also obviously through the intersection and then over to here. So that's already posted, no parking, and it's likely because one, the through traffic was shifted over because of that hatching we talked about and the little bit unorthodox nature of where you have to turn left. But then also because Cedar Boulevard bends horizontally back away from Hollycrest, you don't want to create a situation where you have cars parked along this curb blocking the site.
Yeah, you need a
There's a
sidewalk.
combination of things there.
Sure.
We also don't want pedestrians to have to kind of walk out in front of a parked car and see if any oncoming traffic is coming. So there's no change here, but already parking along the curb for, I want to say 150, 200 feet leading up to the intersection, and then somewhat after it is already restricted. So the first thing what we said was essentially, if we could formalize that with the curbing, essentially we would leave the parking exactly how it is and create that parking along the curb and create a new curb that would then narrow Cedar Boulevard down to a 2-lane section, which is how it's operating anyways. A couple things that accomplishes is one, it is going to decrease the crossing distance. So now pedestrians who are over on this sidewalk on the corner that have to then cross the curb lane as well as that hashed out area to get to the other side. Now they can get out and probably take 8 to 10 feet off of their crossing length. So that's one thing that would do. The second thing that would allow us to do with some new curbing is to bring the Hollycrest approach up to more of a 90-degree angle. Because we have that 2-lane approach that we were talking about, people who are turning left. And I wish I could just toggle back and forth between but people who are turning left, essentially because it's a one-way, they're coming out to here. You know, they're making this bend to here and then they're shooting across. And then the people who are going straight are trying to bring themselves up to a 90-degree so that they can see back around this bend. So you could just see the angle that it comes into Cedar Boulevard. So that first kind of geometric curving change that we're talking about is, will be obviously new ADA ramps. The other thing that this would do is not only shorten the crossing for this approach, but you can see where my hand is, how wide the crossing is on Hollycrest, which was the second highest crossing from here all the way over to here. By doing all of that and 90-degreeing that up and narrowing that down, then that crossing probably becomes half of the length that it is now.
But that narrowing is still to 2 lanes.
I left the width the same. Let me go to the next one. So that would be, yeah. And then on the other side, again, the third highest approach, through that island, there isn't anything right now. So if you are in a bike, in a wheelchair, have a cane, you're pushing a stroller, you wanted to cross on this side, either way, from the north or from the south, then you kind of have to go out around that island, almost into Cedar Boulevard. So we would want to create that crossing and then that refuge area through the middle of the island and then over. So just some new ADA facilities and crossing facilities there. So that's the kind of geometric curve changes. We were showing in here conceptually that this would all be grass, seeded in grass, because you have a landscape strip between the curb and the sidewalk now. So we would just be creating a bigger grass area. We obviously wouldn't be proposing a big concrete bulb out, if you will. It's just a new curb line with seating behind it and becomes a grass area. Same thing over on the other side. The second kind of step in that process, and again, yes, we are showing the 2 lanes coming out, which is a little bit unorthodox. But we did keep the width the same. The second kind of component of this would be enhancing the pavement markings out here. I know we have one very heavily marked crosswalk. The other crosswalks aren't marked. You also don't have a through kind of the middle of the intersection. It's because you are shifting that northbound lane over to the curb where you have that hatched out median area created. You have a pretty wide intersection that has a lot going on in it with one-way traffic, with the Boulevard Island, with Salem Drive being kind of split into 2 and left turns happening in a spot that maybe you're not used to seeing them happen up here as opposed to the back here. So there's a lot happening in there. So what we were saying was mark these crosswalks on these 3 approaches that we've talked about. They're obviously much shorter. If I zoom in a little closer, we're talking about adding yield. This is called a yield line. It's just little white triangles that are in the shape of a yield sign, and you put those on crosswalks, which is another enhancement, yield to pedestrians in the crosswalk. They actually are out on the mid-block crossing at Washington Elementary out here. They're probably faded away by now, but they were there. And then also we want to run a double yellow tracer through the intersection to define really, as you're coming northbound or southbound, where the middle of the intersection is, because there's shifts happening and things like that are happening. So just kind of clean that up. And then another thing that's been shown to be very successful in reducing crashes at intersections. And it seems simple, but it just raises awareness. If you look at the ground when you're driving, like I do, you've probably seen them around. One example I could give is Orr Road and 19 and Upper St. Clair right across from their fire hall.
Mm-hmm.
At the church there, you'll see if you're driving on Route 19 approaching Orr Road, you'll see there's slow legends on those approaches with then the plus symbols, and these are all white, they're thermoplastic. So as you're approaching it, it's just another thing for a motorist who's maybe not paying attention, and then they see these things, and at least it puts the thought in your head, okay, there's an intersection right up here. There's an intersection coming up. So it's, it's a cheap thing. And PennDOT's been putting them in a lot of places, and they've becoming a little bit more popular around. So just another thing for the motorists to give them awareness that they're coming up to this intersection, in addition to the enhancements to the pavement markings at the intersection itself.
Mike, did you look at on we call that north, on Hollycrest, down where, if you go left, right there,
Yeah.
down a little bit to the right, there's always parked cars there.
Okay.
So I'm just worried that evening it up to a 90-degree makes that easier to make the turn. I'm just wondering, and that's a church there, right? Just to the, yeah.
Yes.
There are always cars parked where that Hollycrest is. I just wonder if it makes it harder. It doesn't look like you're narrowing it,
No.
but just knowing that there's always cars there, it just looks weird with that kind of 90-degree on the right side. It looks like maybe there'll be less room. I'm just worried if you have cars making that left and there's cars parked on the right.
Like, should we have no parking a little bit? right
Yeah,
there,
I'm
maybe,
wondering
just
if
right
we
there?
need to push back with the no parking sign where some of those cars are parked now, which then also may be
Yeah,
problematic.
and it might be even that. Yeah, it might be that I don't know where the no parking starts, or, obviously nobody's parking, hopefully they're
Right.
not parking like in the lane that's marked.
But there's also room that they could go around,
Yeah.
but once you get to the point where you have a couple cars stacked on that left, it would block that right side.
Yeah.
With the way parking is, and the answer there may not lie with there's any problem with this, because I think it looks good. It may be with that, maybe we need to move that parking back a spot or two to where there's no
Either better
parking.
signage for no parking, yeah, I know what you mean.
Well, you do.
Like the other thing with the bump out, the way that it's shown on that lower corner of Hollycrest, I'll say, that is gonna tie into, shorten up the crosswalk that exists now. There's a catch basin
Yeah, there's
It's right there.
there could be some.
So I don't know how, I mean, you would have to do something with that catch
Yeah.
basin. And that was put in probably, I don't know, I've been here too long, probably at least 6 years ago. That's an area that we get a significant amount of stormwater that comes down through there and carries down through. So we added a catch basin there, to try to get some additional capacity. So we just may have to look at the location of that catch basin related to a bump out of that corner.
If you, sorry. if
Oh,
you-
out on Cedar.
Yes.
I got you. Well, yeah, I switched
Yeah,
to
it's
the
out
aerial.
on
You
Cedar.
didn't see it, but I'm on the aerial here.
Okay. I was gonna say, I'm just looking at that.
Yeah, can we go to the aerial?
Yeah, if you pull up Polycrest on that area, you'll see what I mean. I was just looking with Mindy.
Cause we're wondering like, why not just make it one lane? If cars are parked
Oh,
anyway, taking it
Oh,
down
for
to one
sure you
lane
can.
anyway.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. This was.
Just an idea. You're just giving us
Yeah,
some
this
initial
was-
thoughts
Correct.
and then we could.
This was like
plan it
high
all
level
out.
concept stuff that, you know,
Yeah.
as a first shot at the traffic board and then through the discussion, they just said, well, let's.
Throw it to
Like
the
all of it,
commission.
push it up to the commission.
Okay.
So it wasn't, not a whole lot more detailed,
Yeah.
you know, layouts and concepts were put together for that.
And there's a
no
lot of
cars
traffic
parked there now.
At night when people are at school events,
That's
trying to circle
it's
around and
outlet for
find
the
parking
school.
spots and.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Gurley, what do you, we're.
Oh, here. Yeah, thanks.
See.
Well, I was gonna say, if do a street, I don't know if you could do it here, but if you pull up Google and you pull up the street view, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. You drop it right there, yeah. Pull back from the church and look that way.
It's not there now, of course.
But you can see this sign where it says
Yeah.
3-hour parking right there.
Yeah,
Maybe
there's-
you can see where the
Yeah, there's
yellow
not,
lines way up at the intersection.
And I mean, the one that I'm looking at, this has been my experience too. You'll see cars there right up to that,
there you go.
yeah,
There you go.
I mean,
Stacked up, just
you're-
one lane anyway.
you're tight.
And that's allowable. You saw the sign.
That's almost always there.
Well, what I'm saying is it's posted, parking allowed there,
Yeah.
right up to, you can see where the yellow, where the curb has been marked with yellow.
Yeah, that would be certainly a consideration.
And I have to imagine it's convenient, you know, because there's, people can jump right out of that, right onto the sidewalk to go into the church. So it's, you know,
Mhm, church, tennis,
Yeah.
school. So would this intersection be a good candidate for a roundabout? The last space.
I thought about it.
Yeah,
Do I have enough?
there you go.
You know, roundabouts aren't great for disabled people. I'm sorry, but they really aren't because disabled people need the traffic to stop and the time to get across in a wheelchair or with a cane or with a walker. I think the fact that you're pulling these curbs out into the street and essentially making the street appear to be narrowed is going to have a wonderful traffic calming attempt at this intersection, which I think is going to be very valuable. There's a lot of speeding on Cedar Boulevard.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think roundabouts are the answer to everything, and especially not for disabled.
I don't disagree with you, Ann. The only thing that I called out here was that parking across the.
Oh, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I
Because
thought the parking.
that street view, we may just need to lose a couple parking spots there.
Right, lose a couple parking spots, but I think the plan that we just saw is a pretty good one, Mike.
Andrew, what do you got?
Yes, Mike, couple things. One, yeah, I think anything that's gonna slow this down, right? Because, and I appreciate, right, that the traffic is, and the accidents are de minimis when compared to the traffic standards. But if I think about that space, I want people walking to the park.
Right,
I want to, and to the school, I want to promote walkability in this space. Not just protect people who are doing it now, but I want more people to do it. And so whatever we can do to protect that crosswalk and frankly, make the whole intersection slower, and more accessible to pedestrians, I think we're gonna be in a better position. I like the design. I think my question is there any justification for a raised crosswalk?
right.
Because again, what I'm thinking about is creating Because from this intersection down to Greenhurst, we have lots of pedestrians, right? People park and they walk across the street and it drives me nuts. I drive through there all the time. Drives me up a wall that they do it, but the reality is that we've provided parking on that far side. If you scroll down a little ways, right, we've provided parking on that far side, which means people are cutting across,
Yes.
right?
all the
All
running
this,
across.
which is dangerous. And yes, it's posted 25, but if I'm not creating some experience where people are actively being like, oh, I am in a pedestrian heavy zone,
Mhm.
they're just gonna keep blowing through this, which I think this is a great step. But I recognize that this is one piece of a broader puzzle, which is I've got the parking down the hill, so I want to potentially create some kind of bump or experience that's going to make people realize that this is a pedestrian space. The other thing I'm thinking about is I want people walking up to La Gourmandine and to CBS and those places, and how do I want them getting there? Chances are, I want them to cross here and then walk up to the intersection if they're going to, well, if they were once upon a time going to Dollar General. I want them crossing sooner rather than up at that intersection up the hill. So how am I promoting crossing here so that I'm not creating more, density of activity up at that next intersection?
I mean, this would be a lot, obviously it'd be a lot more expensive, but if if we move the parking that's currently on the other side and put it on the high school side, right?
Parking, wait,
What's
The
side?
park, the
Cedar?
mountable curve
Oh.
is on the other side.
right.
And we turn more of the lane there and put the parking on this side. We'd have to move.
There's
We'd have to
parking
move.
on
There is parking on both sides now. Yeah,
In the road, that's right. Yeah.
There's parallel spots. and-
You're right, sorry.
I have both sides, yeah.
Except for that small part,
And it's
right?
full,
Yeah.
like after school hours, it's full.
yeah, believe me, I
Is
would,
is it possible to put, I mean, we've got the mountable curb with the area where people park, but we don't have a sidewalk there, right?
right.
Correct.
I mean, maybe that, again, it'd be more
Narrow
expensive. but-
cedar,
Well, I think to a certain extent, I want people getting across. Right, but I think, yeah, this intersection for me, this to the Greenhurst intersection is really, it is a pedestrian heavy zone, and we probably just need to recognize that and be thinking about how do we create that experience for drivers, knowing that I don't want people crossing there, but they're going to.
That's right.
Like create the experience for the drivers that once I'm at Greenhurst, well, actually frankly, to be farther ideally, but Greenhurst to here, right? People know it's a heavy zone and I've got that heavy tactile experience from a driving perspective. That, like I said, that's why I thought about just that raised crosswalk experience. But other than that, I like it. I think it's much better than what we've got now.
Can I jump back real quick to the other one and just to kind of touch on the last?
Yeah.
Yeah, but also to Commissioner Flint's question, get a raised sidewalk.
So I have to look at that a little closer.
Yeah.
okay, that's fair. Yeah, we're throwing you ideas, you're coming up with some brainstorming and we're.
There are
Maybe
other
that's it.
issues that are raised with raised
Okay.
crosswalk. Typically, a raised crosswalk is at a mid-block location, not at an
Yeah.
intersection. If you're gonna raise something at an intersection, you have a raised intersection, but then that's the whole intersection, is all four approaches are raised
Okay.
through it. So let me look a little bit closer to that. And there's also some volume constraints to it
Sure.
too. So a whole lot, there's certain thresholds. If you have this
Mhm.
certain high volume of vehicular traffic, then you don't want to consider something like that. Then just one little comparison I wanted to throw out, we collected some data at 19 at Cedar. As part of we were trying to get the PennDOT to allow us to close the curb lane for some extended hours. And from 7 to 8 AM at 19 in Cedar,
What's 19 in Cedar?
Washington, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
In the
Washington
in the
Road,
uptown.
corner of Washington Road, right here.
19.
Okay,
The amount of traffic in 1 hour in both directions at that intersection with 4 lanes is as much as there is here in
wow,
the evening peak hour.
wow. On a pedestrian traffic or traffic?
Vehicular traffic.
Vehicular traffic.
So there's a lot of traffic coming through
Yeah, can I add the spitball list as long as you're checking on that raised crosswalk? If we can't do the raised crosswalk at Holy Crest can a raised sidewalk be done with these people crossing by the tennis courts? You know, put something there. Essentially, not at this intersection here, this cannot be a raised sidewalk.
I see, like
As
a,
Commissioner Flynn suggested, if you go.
like a skinny pump almost
You
crosswalk.
got a light. You have a light there. Why do you need a raised crosswalk with green?
In the midsection, mid-block crosswalk.
Mid-block, the idea is say go further left or, you know, on Cedar, you know, like.
You're talking closer to the school.
A raised
Yes.
mid-block crosswalk.
Yeah. Right
between them.
Right, where all those people park and there's a.
Where the entrance to the tennis center is, 'cause- yeah.
The other piece that you didn't touch on that was in your.
Yep, the last piece is just, these figures all build on each other. So this has all the other components, the curves, the pavement markings, and then this one is showing the potential for a pedestrian actuated with a push button, it's called an RR, rapid response flashing beacons. It's just like what's out on Washington Road and Washington Elementary. So it's, you know, a pedestrian pushes the button and then those flashing lights go, and it would be on, you know, traffic coming in both directions on Cedar would see it on both of them. Just another awareness, you know, an enhancement. There's a lot of education that comes with those though.
People think they're
It
safe.
doesn't
Right.
require, it doesn't, it's not a stop light, it's
Right.
not a red light, doesn't require, it's just an awareness thing, but. Making pedestrians aware that, hey, just but the fact that you push that button doesn't mean you don't have this crosswalk, you know, this is still on the pedestrian. So those are the components.
Okay, so that would be an additional option.
Yeah,
And you had, I know we're running past the time allotted for the subject, but you had given us some ballpark cost information.
Yes.
for The three options in your memo.
You all three are on 75.
I said,
175 for all three, including the
Yeah.
lights.
at least this has at least.
Yep.
For each one individually, just so we. have
yeah,
it.
those flashers are, with all the equipment and the foundations and all the power and everything, you have to get to an installation there. 5 years ago, we were doing them for 40,000, but they're, you know, all in, they're 60,000 now. And then obviously it's kind of back in the envelope, but I did pull some quantities in for curve and things like that to come up with that kind of estimate for 100,000, but that's ramps, ADA ramps on all the corners that we talked about. And then all those series of thermoplastic pavement markings, probably be 15,000 or so.
The police did a study that was, excuse me, related to it was like Green Light Go, right? Excuse me. A couple of years ago uptown, and I know as part of that, they wrapped in some sort of conversation about the safety of those flashing crosswalks. I wonder if we can pull the information that was included in that report for just to circulate that. It was,
Also, when that was put in, that was some grant money, then State Senator Matt Smith was involved when that was put in.
and when they did that follow-up, I know Chief was in here talking about it. You may have even been in here, Mike, talking about when that study was happening and we had gotten a grant and it was like, look up Lebo was part of that. And there was a significant amount of conversation around the safety of those crosswalks, in particular, the false safety that comes from those flashing lights.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
And I know that was part of that report. Well, I think it was part of the report. It was definitely part of the conversation. I wonder if we have anything that we could look at that talks about the safety of those flashes, because if it's not, at the time, we were arguing whether we fix it. We were talking about replacing the lights that were really expensive in the road, and that was part of the conversation.
That was the in-pavement lighting,
Yes.
which PennDOT issued that as sort of a
that was on like a trial.
experimental,
Yeah.
Right.
right? Since we installed those, actually, there were other studies that said, really, they're not appropriate for our area of the country. There's too many issues with them.
Yeah.
There's way too many utility conflicts up on Washington
Yeah.
Road to put money back into fixing those.
Right.
But the upright flashers seem to be, I'll say, better received and have better response to them. But we do have a crosswalk policy that
Yeah.
actually Gateway put together.
I think that's what you're referring to.
That's
So
what
the studies that I've referred to have been ones that there's some good data that says marking a crosswalk can be detrimental. As opposed to, you know, not
Just
marking it, right? Because.
Being careful. Right.
And the pedestrians were careful about when they cross, as opposed, because right now, for some reason, the sentiment is, oh, I could just step into the crosswalk and everybody has to stop. You know, it's, but the
It's
vehicle
counterintuitive.
code, the vehicle code, the onus is on the pedestrian. You can't step into that crosswalk until it's safe to do so.
Is that an argument against the flashers?
So the flashers, I think, are a little bit different. The flashers are just an awareness for motorists who are approaching the intersection, just like the pavement markings are. The issue could become that, you know, if you don't educate the different ages and people that are crossing here, if they think just by pushing that button, those flashers going on, that they can just step out into the crosswalk. They can't.
So what if we put cameras on some of these flashing crosswalks so we can catch people that are running them? I mean, I'm sorry, but the idea that somehow we won't put crosswalks in because it encourages pedestrians to think they're safe. They should be safe. The streets are about people as well as cars. So it seems to me we really ought to be thinking about how we stop people from running them. Of course, I roll down my window and yell at people, which is not particularly a good idea, but
Yeah.
I stop.
I mean, I take your point. I just have seen, unfortunately, up there at, across from Washington Elementary where people zoom through.
Right.
And they go, and they, and I.
We gotta stop them from zooming through. One of the things is when people cross streets, I remember when there were discussion was we do away with that crosswalk in front of Washington Road. And that's ludicrous because no one is going to drag their kid in the pouring rain all the way down, to in front of the municipal building to cross. It's not going to happen. People would do it if there was a crosswalk there or not. And I think it's our responsibility to try to make it as safe as possible. The road is not just for the cars. People have to get across. We have sidewalks on both sides.
I agree with you, Commissioner Swager Wilson. I just want to throw one other thing out there,
Sorry.
no, you're good.
Where you go?
No.
Just
you're
teeing
fine.
up my
You're
next-
fine. Don't worry about it. I was just gonna say because we have that stormwater intake site that's clearly going to add cost to that project.
It will.
But I would love to see some green stormwater infrastructure in that new green space instead of it just being grass.
You can make it out. The grass.
Part of the engineering capacity.
Yeah, but we could do something.
Yeah, the grass is a plus, we could do it better,
Yeah, right.
Water coming down. It's a
Good
good point.
idea.
To wrap it up, I think you're hearing we're commission's in support of the three ideas. And yes, and we'd like to see some additional ideas, the two, addition mid-block crosswalk or raised crosswalk.
I like,
Right, is that right?
and I think not coalesced around what is the thing to spend the money on, but I think we're
Yes.
collecting more ideas. And we want to add a couple more to the list. What can they do it? What do they cost?
Yeah, come bring it back on discussion and then finalize what we really are gonna do.
We'll see, Mike.
I mean, if we're gonna look at the cost of doing a mid-block crosswalk, we should also look at the cost of adding a sidewalk along that parking. Because that might encourage people to take the sidewalk to the next crosswalk
Yeah.
rather than cross the street in the middle of the road.
As far as
True.
owning property to, because you obviously have what's paved now, the parking. You would need to add additional space going up that hillside,
We own that.
do we?
Yes, it's the municipalities. We do maintain
I'm
it.
sorry, I mean,
It's just grass.
needs to be
It's-
right for improvement.
Topographically, you'd have to do some grading in order to get a level enough surface to add a sidewalk section in
For
there.
an ADA site.
Unless we narrow the road and take the sidewalk from the road.
It wouldn't be,
Yeah, and anything can be done. It's just a matter of if we can put numbers to it.
Yeah.
At that point, the third lane is parking.
Right, we're narrowing the
Parking, Single
sidewalk,
lane,
put
single
the-
lane.
put the sidewalk there, narrowing those spaces.
So, but given that we're already,
They wanted,
given we're already at court eight, we have the Garden Road, do we transition to? So, yes, to it.
you got what you need from
Absolutely.
I do.
Thank you.
us?
That's why I think maybe just in the interest of time, we left Arden Road there's still two decision points. I'll spend 10 seconds on this just to show you kind of where we're at we did all the survey and everything, and we've laid the design out. This is the Beverly and Arden intersection. Pretty straightforward. We've created the geometry. We've made sure that fire trucks and so forth can make this turn like we talked about, so it's a little wider at the bottom than maybe it is at the top. That's just kind of a sneak peek at that plan. Same thing with the McCann intersection. This is the actual survey and what these widths are gonna be, so we'll have about 20 feet around it. Again, it's always stop controlled. We're gonna do the roll curb, like you see elsewhere in the municipality, and then we're gonna just leave this as we'll fill it and put topsoil in there, and then the neighborhood can have their flower planting party when the time comes.
So that's the ones we already decided on, and you're just
Yeah.
kind of showing us the latest schematics.
Yes.
Hit
So let
refresher.
me. Do we want to talk 2 or 3 speed humps, or do you want to talk?
Speed
about-
humps and overlook intersection, maybe speed humps?
Speed humps is, well, I think it comes down to a question of whether or not we want two
Two or
or
three.
three.
Okay, so we're settled on the one up at 287, 286 Arden, that's between North Meadowcroft and Overlook. That's never been in question. We are settled on the one at 406 and 409 Arden, which is just call it east of Marlin Drive West. And the one that's in question is the one this is where we originally had it proposed. This is kind of at 424 Arden, 421. Just off the screen here is Marlin Drive West. No, Marlin Drive, yeah, Marlin Drive West. Okay, so this resident has expressed their concerns with that speed hump and essentially said that they don't want it. Other residents in this same block have said that they do, and they think that it's integral to the plan. We came up with an alternate location. You can see, let me go back real quick. You can see kind of where the transition from the brick to asphalt is here and where we're showing the speed hump originally. We shifted it a little further west as another option, but that would require us to kind of take out this would be half in where the brick isn't half not, so
Take some.
the construction of that would require removal of brick, and it would require a 3-foot,
Concrete.
yeah.
Yeah.
We'd be reconstructing, it would be a lot more expensive than the $10,000 number we put on them, each one of them individually, so. That would be the difference. Even under this scenario, my understanding is the resident still said, that's still too close to my property, I don't really want it. So I think if it's a decision of, if we're gonna have it, I think it wants to be where it wants to be, which is in the original location,
Mhm.
or we don't have it. And then thirdly, I think an option could be, Keith mentioned, and maybe Mindy has an interest, I don't know if you guys have an interest, but the municipality does have one of those temporary speed humps that you can kind of bolt down to the surface and to the road, but
Yeah,
I like
so
it.
what's
if you put
the,
that in, what's the, kind of have to have a mechanism to say you want to make it
What's the
permanent.
end
or
game
not.
there? Yeah.
What's the end game? And then if you end up removing it and not going permanent, then you have about 10,000 holes that were drilled in the pavement. That's gonna fall apart.
oh, I see. If you put a temporary speed hump in and then you remove it, then you still have some cost to repair that.
Yeah,
road.
you're probably gonna have to kind of overlay that section.
I see. Okay, so our choices are 3 speed humps or 2 speed humps, and if we go with 3, we could install a temporary speed hump. Is that really my summary of it? And the recommendation of the traffic board and the engineer's recommendation was to do 3 because that's the maximum traffic calming that we could.
Yeah,
achieve.
that was in the final plan that the traffic board recommended
Mhm.
and that the neighborhood as a whole reached consensus on.
Right.
The question and the concern that came up from this resident was after
Was after the traffic
all of
board
the
and the
neighborhood meetings
residents.
and all
Yeah.
of the.
When the engineers and the police look at this, the rules for traffic calming are not subjective, they're very objective. You're looking at the amount of traffic, peak, off-peak, things like that. You're looking at the characteristics of the road. When we get to the point where that's proven out, and I believe there's a stipulation in there that also says if the police have looked at this and they deem the road to be unsafe, which, there's a stipulation in there that basically says the police can kind of overrule something and say, hey, it might not be warranted, but we believe from all of these crashes that we've experienced that traffic calming does need to be put there. correct me if I'm wrong. That's kind of what our rules say.
Yeah, when it has to be crashed, but it can be speed.
Okay. And then we get to a point where there's like bickering between like, I don't want it in front of my house, I don't want it in front of my house. Like those, that's not part of our very objective rules for determining whether traffic calming needs to be placed. So I would lean toward following the recommendations of the engineers, the traffic board that look at this. I mean, that's my comment. I mean, there's clearly a need. People are saying, hey, we believe there's a need based on traffic or whatever it is that they're bringing to the traffic board. The traffic board recommends looking at it, the engineers look at it, the police look at it, they commission an official study, they come back with the response, and then the response is, well, I don't want it in front of my house. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I think
Sounds like sidewalk.
yeah, I vote for the 3 speed bumps where they were originally recommended, because I do empathize with people not wanting them in front of their house, but our overall goal is to calm traffic so that pedestrians are safer. We've been hearing about this for literally 2 decades, that it's not safe to walk on Harmon. I want to do as much as we can
And we
do.
did hear from other residents in that block, including on the other side where it is gonna be.
And they want it.
They want it.
Most people want it, overwhelmingly, majority wants it, which is pretty rare with traffic.
Never for anything.
That's true.
Just a quick point of information, the cost of the third speed hump versus the temporary.
Well, the temporary.
Usually when you have to-
You have it, and then Public Works would install it, so I don't know. how
And
much
then
it
if
costs.
you remove it, the bill and overlay cost.
Oh,
there's
yeah.
Kind of a delta between,
Yeah,
you know, those two, and boxcar number.
it might not be that different.
Okay, that's
You know,
why.
by the
that
time
is-
you pay for the labor to install it and take it out, and then you have a, you know,
Mill and
contractor
overlay.
have to come in and
Yeah,
mill it
so-
over.
all right, okay, that's what I wanted to know. So, yeah, I think, I agree with the commissioners, we just did the proposed is 3 speed humps, let's do the 3 speed humps.
Okay. And then now to our,
Commissioner Flynn,
Our
Commissioner
favorite.
Squager Wilson, did you have any thoughts?
I'm good.
I'm okay with the 3. I'm always for safety over one resident's wishes. I'm sorry for that resident, but safety rules.
Thank you.
okay. Then the last one is our, kind of our favorite intersection of overlook. We've talked quite a bit about
That's
it.
right, we couldn't make a decision for the last 3
Yeah.
Got 7 minutes on this, so we can do this.
Yeah, I think this is the geometry of it is gonna be the same as what you're seeing here. So this is actual survey out here. These are the actual curb lines. Turns out that, you know, what we kind of created from that aerial mapping, it's actually a little bit wider through this offset area than what we had estimated from our LiDAR than when we actually surveyed it. So we're able to actually kind of get this island in here and get the geometry in here so that even at its pinch point, so right kind of at this little point, straight to here,
Yeah,
is still wider than 12 feet.
not as bad as we thought.
Yeah, so
Okay.
it's, this little pinch point would have to be up here. You know, and you can see, almost see the curves kind of tapering and getting a little bit wider and wider. So it's, you know, we were able to keep it similar size and we actually have a little bit more room for the turns than we thought we did. So we cleaned some of that stuff up. Here's really what the difference is gonna be. What we're showing here is, this is all concrete, raised concrete, and we were showing essentially 2 triangular shaped raised islands, and this would be concrete mountable curb. So it wouldn't be barrier curb, like you would see out, you know, that's perpendicular to the ground.
Right.
It's gonna be at a 45-degree angle that a vehicle could actually mount it. and
Parking spots on each seat.
Some curves, like the road curves, kind of.
Yeah, it won't be the rule. This
Won't
will
be
be like, like a straight.
Okay.
So if somebody misses it totally, they don't.
They'll be damaged.
Bottom out of the
Probably.
curve.
Right. So there'll be 2 of those and it, you know, it ends up being about 6 inches, a 6-inch high. We can adjust that really if there's concerns from the fire department.
So 6-inch high concrete at an angle.
Just around the end would be, the curves would be at an angle and then in here, this would all just be like, it would almost look like a sidewalk, but it's just, you know, just a
Okay.
concrete island. Through the middle of it would be flush with the asphalt because that's your crossing. And then we would have our little DWSs in the middle there, just like you have on the corner, effectively walking surfaces. Marking this crosswalk, because this is actually where everybody crosses, this is where the crossing guard is, and they cross through the middle here anyways. So we're really just kind of defining what's happening out there with the pedestrians now. And then the other thing we want to do is with the pavement markings is really define it visually for the motorists. And as you're coming out, you can follow those tracers that we talked about on Cedar Boulevard. These will be double yellow tracers. That kind of steers you out into this area here. So if you're making a left, you continue down. And if you want to continue on Arden, then you kind of make that left turn, then you have to make the right turn. What's happening now is you can see this gray stop bar. This is where the stop bar is now. People are kind of rolling up to here. And then once they see they can go, they're coming straight through like that.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the phenomena that's happening through the middle of that intersection.
And you said there's a decision point for us here.
So the decision point is, do we raise it, which has this geometry, or if I go to the next page, it's gonna look exactly the same, but the difference is this is flush. This is all concrete, is all flush, and this is all rumble strip.
Let me give us a picture, I think.
Right.
Yeah, so I'll kind of show you what that looks like. It looks like that.
Yeah.
And then you would still have the markings, you'd still have, those delineators, which I also showed kind of a picture of. Here's what these delineators that are in there would look like. So if I go back to here, these little triangular, or these little diamond shaped things, those are the delineators, so they would all be yellow.
Right.
Okay, so there'd be 3 of them. We'd have a yellow line around it, that's what the dark line is. And then you'd have that flush concrete, so we'd still have the tracers, so you'd still steering you out to there. The only real difference is there is if a fire truck did want to make this move, which again, we've talked about, if depending on the side of Arden that a fire truck's going to, I don't know that one would, in an emergency, would come up Arden and, I think they would have to come in another way.
The chief
Pretty
is
clear,
here,
just
so I
find
want to
another
see,
way, right?
chief, do you have a preference for either
I
one?
think if anything, we would come up, overlook from Beverly and either make a left or a right, so.
There's no preference here?
Raise curb, I'll run it over if I have to.
Well,
Right.
That's the idea. The idea was that either one of them could be run over. This one, would be less concerning to run over than having to drive up over. You know what I mean? But,
Yeah.
Is why you do the raised curb, because it's less likely somebody's gonna come run over a kid. The fire truck can get over it as long as Nick feels that the fire truck, if it's raised, can get over it if it has to. I think we raise it. Yeah, protection.
The raised curb is more of a deterrent than this.
Yeah,
Yeah,
This is
I
gonna
don't
be,
disagree.
wipe out the poles and whatever else, but it's your ward.
yeah, 100%. And this is a heavy traffic area for pedestrians, but it's also a big area for vehicular collisions. So this will really, I think, slow
Yeah.
everybody down, pay attention, and then if you
Well,
do
if you
crash,
can
it's gonna
walk
slow.
around.
It's gonna slow them down because they're trying to figure out what
What
to
to
do.
do. They're gonna be confused, which is what you want in an intersection.
Well,
Look around.
And quite frankly, like we talked about at the traffic board,
Okay, I'm okay with ugly as long as it's safe.
Arden is, this neighborhood really meant for the volume. Because it's a pretty significant cut through to get from Beverly to Cochrane and vice versa. So what we talked about at the traffic board with the neighborhood was, you take each one of these elements along the way, we're trying to create just enough of a deterrent and just enough of an annoyance that if we can reduce that cut through traffic by 10 or 12%, then we've done our job.
Right.
What if we put bricks in the insert around the curb, kind of dressed it up to make it look a little bit better, more like the neighborhood?
I think that would look good, Dan. I think that's a good
Brick
idea.
brick pavers.
Put brick pavers
Not
in there.
concrete, like a typical
I mean,
PennDOT.
inside the,
Yeah,
inside the
Spruce it up a little
mountains,
bit.
yeah, you can make it look a little more
Oh, yeah.
aesthetically pleasing for the neighborhood.
or even a stamped
It's like
concrete or
flat.
something.
The
Yeah.
flat part's not bricks.
Yeah.
It's a concrete.
Even better.
Nicer.
Well, I always go back to, this stuff's gonna be here a long time, so, don't don't shortchange.
Fine.
Well, it's gonna last, so, if you can dress it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, and spend that little extra now, it will pay dividends.
I don't think it'd be a huge expense.
No, it shouldn't be.
For that little island, but
So we're yes with the concrete raised, but maybe add brick if you can.
But yes,
we'll shoot a picture off of what that would look like.
Yeah.
We can render something real quickly, I think, just to get a visual on it, so everybody's okay with it. We'll have Keith, get that over to Keith.
We have other examples.
Excellent.
In the fourth ward where. Yeah.
Any other thoughts? I'm not sure. It sounds like we have 3 votes to proceed.
I'm a yes.
I'm a yes.
That's already on this.
No, let's hear it.
if we're trying to reduce traffic and that's what we want to do, I said this before, I said in an email, I said in the meeting, putting no left turns on these, I think gets it done. And it's a lot cheaper and it's a lot easier. So I know there's conversation about, well, people will go in other areas, and if what we're trying to achieve is a little bit less traffic, if we make it harder for people to do a certain thing in that area, the traffic will be reduced.
But it's not just about the traffic. Once again, you have to remember where the people cross. You can't make people do what you want them to do, cross where you want them to necessarily. They're going to cross where they're used to crossing. That is a really wide intersection. And I go right back to disabled people that have kids in strollers and dragging one along by the hand, et cetera, et cetera. I think making that intersection safer for the pedestrian is just as important as reducing the traffic.
I fundamentally disagree with your comment that you can't force people to cross where you want them to cross. That's the idea of a crosswalk. That's literally what it's for.
Okay, I'm going to give you an example. You remember the old Gimbel's Garage downtown?
Do not.
Okay, it's the garage where 8th Street comes into Liberty. And you can go straight across and go into the garage. For years, the parking authority tried to discourage people from cutting through when it was raining and snowing. Finally, they hired an architect who said, no. Let's make a safe pathway through the garage. This is Pittsburgh. The weather is lousy. That's what they ended up doing, raising a little sidewalk through it, and people use it to this day, and they made it safe. Because try as they might, they could not get people to stop cutting through and cutting in front of cars and traffic. That's what I mean. I mean, you really have to think about how people use things and adapt.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that as I've told you all, right, humans are gonna human.
Right.
The goal isn't, I don't think we can say no, right? That's just a reality. I mean, you can try to say no, but that requires enforcement, which is just a capacity issue. So the question is how do you encourage the best behavior and create a safe space where they're going to do what they're going to do anyway?
Right.
So, I mean, I think a crosswalk, right, that the purpose of a crosswalk is to encourage them to use the safest path, but that requires us to design it as safely as possible. Yet
Agreed.
in the space that we're trying to encourage that behavior. So it's a trade-off, right? And how do we balance these factors? I think people are going to do what they're going to do. So how do we create the experience to be a safe in that space? Yeah, as they're doing it over time, right? And hopefully they change behavior, but again, we're at least designing it in a way that's going to encourage us going in a certain direction.
If I could summarize, it sounds like we certainly have 3, if not 4 commissioners in favor of proceeding as proposed of the raised curb, with all due respect, Commissioner Miller. And so hopefully Gateway has their directions for how to proceed. Unless anybody else has other comments, more for our audience, if you want to comment, we have the main meeting starting.
5 minutes ago.
That'll be in the main room, and there's the 5-minute comment section if you want to speak in citizens' comments. With that, we are.
The only other thing I
Hang on.
We're not answered yet.
We have one.
Sorry, the only other thing I wanted to say, just because I know the question's gonna come up. From a schedule standpoint, now that I have these answers, we're gonna finalize this design. And I'm gonna work with Keith on figuring out when we advertise to get it back to you guys so that we can have this stuff constructed over the summer when school's out.
This summer.
All right, okay, now we're adjourned. Great, thanks. Keith.
Thank you, Mike. That was a lot for you. Thank you.